Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom, Mir, Satnam, Pranam, Nihao, Buenos Dias, Etche, Konnichiwa, Sabatikrat, Salangwa, Esh, Agape, Akwaba, Vokamin, what up, though? This is the weekly consideration, and it is somewhat of an abbreviation because the situation is remediation. Haha, how about that? Somewhat later, it is Thursday. It is in the afternoon. It is not the first of the day. It's not the AM. However, it's getting done. And the intention is to get it done increasingly concisely, not necessarily concisely, because that suggests organization. But to be somewhat brief, comparatively so, as my joints can be lengthy. Anyways, the point is, seriously ain't got time. So I have some notes, and I'm going to just simply riff with the notes, if that's a thing. And it's actually involved, and it's beneficial to like take time and kind of like just to be comfortable and fluid and not hurried in getting through these insights. However, as such is the case, life often calls for acclamation. So the theme for today, for the weekly consideration, is aligning our core. I did have to look at the notes for that because it's not in my notes actually. I just remembered that. How about that? So aligning our core. And so the basic joint, I might have utilized that almost verbatim theme before on a previous weekly consideration, even this past year. So in terms of originality, perhaps less impressive. However, in terms of relevance, increasingly appropriate, at least if I do say so myself. And the basic idea of aligning our core is, as we are here with Asona Ashram and Sangha Yosef, and additionally are immersed in the experience and the intentionality and actuality of organizing community, village, ourselves. And it's a tenacious thing because particularly when we're coming from different experiences, cats is just meeting each other for the first time. We got personalities, we got egos, we got intentionalities, we got histories, we got drama, we got baggage, we got all these things amidst the sentiment of solidarity. And one of the important essentials in the longevity, the endurance, the persivisity, that's almost like resilience and perseverance all together, and then just going on and doing something else, perhaps longevity, but all that to be done further along. It is beneficial and even necessary to have discipline, shared discipline, the things that make us healthy, the things that we do regularly to make ourselves healthy individually, and then bringing that together and doing it collectively. Aligning our core, the core of how we sustain ourselves, mind, body, spirit, and doing that collectively. Some communities have been doing it for thousands of years, so it ain't no big thing. Some cats have been, for one way or another, migrated from that practice, and so we find our individual ways of doing it, even when we come from a family experience. Coming from our individual ways of doing our individual family ways of doing it, but when coming together as community with what we've learned, with who we are, with what we identify as our purpose and our vision in life in terms of pluralism and getting along with people who are different from ourselves. That means finding how we are together, how we are healthy together, what we do to make ourselves healthy respectively and collectively. So that's aligning our cores. Again, the daily things, what we eat, the healthy things, our exercise, our regimens, our prayers and meditation. Additionally, oh wait, you just said prayers. Oh no, please turn the channel. Well, that's part of what's involved, because if we're talking about building community with people who believe in different things than ourselves, who do different things than ourselves, it's a matter of finding how we build with ourselves in a genuine, authentic, pragmatic way, with our prayers and with our meditation, with our yoga, with our silences, and with all the other puja and with other ways that we strengthen and nurture our spirit and our minds and our bodies, because that's core, that's essential, and it's easier said than done. It ain't easy to say either, but it's easier said than done. So that's what's meant, that's intended as aligning our core, finding out for ourselves what it is, because particularly when we're younger, we have yet to even know, like to generally know like what we do that actually seriously is support. A lot of it is what we're told to do. A lot of it is just abiding by authorities' commands for ourselves, and just recognizing the protections, the comforts that we get from the authority that tells us to do those things without actually not recognizing and seeing the benefits that come with that when we're in the wilds and we're dealing with the beasts, and we're like, yo, I'm glad I did that, because it would have been nasty otherwise. So when we have that experience and we learn those things firsthand of the benefits that come with the preparation, then we're starting to have an understanding of what health is, what healing is, and what life is. How about that? So, hey, that's what we find for ourselves. And then it's a matter of connecting with others, because again, particularly in this experience of life today, it's very cosmopolitan. Particularly if we're living in a city, and additionally, we're meeting people, kinfolk, beautiful people from different walks of life, who find additional ways of solving and answering that need of health and well-being and life. And if we want to maintain these relationships, if we honor these relationships, the love that we have for each other, it's a matter of finding like, okay, how can we like support each other and connect with each other in the ways that we sustain ourselves respectively. So aligning our core. It's a matter of having a conversation about that, not just like the pleasantries of popular culture or whatever, but delving further deep in the depth of meaningfully within who we are as individuals and in this life, families, communities, histories, aspirations, and accordingly. So it's not just economic networking and jumping on bandwagons and whatever else, or having the trinkets that signify that. Not being critical about it either. So all that being said, identifying the things that heal us, that strengthen us and nurture us, what we do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a yearly basis, the rituals, the songs, the stories, the discipline, the ethics. So along those lines, here's where we get into the nitty gritty. That's the nice spiel. So for cats who just want to hear the nice spiel, there it is, and then discontinuation can happen. But for those who are interested in further delving into the nitty gritty, heavy lifting, here we go. Health. Here's the mathematics about health. These are scientifically proven. Health is 99% auto-psychosomatic. And I am going from notes now. So auto-psychosomatic. We can say it's all 100% psychosomatic, but 99% auto-psychosomatic. That means, breaking down further. Well, what does auto-psychosomatic mean? Auto means just like it comes from ourselves, because in a certain theology, everything is psychosomatic. If we talk about the Buddha, everything comes from our minds. Then everything is necessarily 100% psychosomatic. So in actuality, we recognize that when we're sentient in this awake state, or perceivably awake state, but we respectively identify ourselves as individuals, and we observe other individuals who also have sentience that is distinctive than our own specific immediate experience of sentience. Then we say, wait a minute, everything's not about myself, because if I do this other person is going to do this back. So it's not all auto-psychosomatic. So health it falls into that category as well. So because our health is not necessarily fully determined by what we specifically do respectively as our own individual corporal bodies respectively. So I say 99%, 99. And I'll break down the percentages further. So, because this so far is not necessarily being further brief, so I have to be mindful of that. So 99%, 90% is proactive. I can already see auto-psychosomatic is going to be somewhat of a hang-up, so I'm just going to say psychosomatic. Even though auto-psychosomatic is increasingly appropriate, we're just going to say psychosomatic for the moment. 90%, 90% for the purposes of this discourse at the moment. 90% is proactive psychosomatic, meaning that our experience of health is 90% of what we do proactively to be healthy. And then it's 9%, 9% post psychosomatic, meaning what we do after experiencing injury, illness, or otherwise, how we respond to it, how we react to it, how we treat ourselves. how we put the band-aids on, and additionally. So that's the 99% of the health, the psychosomatic. Then the 1% is professional intervention, and that means going to a healer, getting some type of additional insight, remedy, treatment, and additionally 1%. So 99% of our experience of health, again, scientifically proven. I'm being somewhat facetious and sarcastic, but actual as well, because that's the nature of science. Proof. 99%. 90% proactive psychosomatic, 9% post psychosomatic. But the purpose of us is it's mindfulness. It's our mind, and the 1% that is through professional intervention from another is even that. Essentially, again, next level theology also comes from our own minds. Our relationship with the other individuals, what we do to precipitate support and additionally other individuals. But the importance of this is to recognize how much of our experience of health comes from our own selves, and particularly comes from our own mindset, and how our minds influence our bodies to exercise, to eat healthy, and additionally, and how much that contributes to our experience of health. 99%, 90% proactive, 9% post psychosomatic. All right. Our parents teach us our health from an early age, generally speaking, and it's the education of the mind to know what to do proactively to be healthy, and then when there is certain affliction, teaching the mind what to do to respond to that affliction, and within recent centuries, apothecaries evolve into corporations. Obviously, not all corporations are apothecaries, but apothecaries at this point become corporations by and large. Modern science, through modern science. Delving into it, the republic, the world republic, that becomes predominant within recent centuries, essentially separates the individual from family, because in its initial stages, republic responds to the woeful actions and injustices, atrocities committed by monarchies, and the nepotism of hiring and rewarding people on the basis of connection and bloodline rather than necessarily merit and skill and capability and righteousness. And so that generation after generation translates into a political malaise that eventually manifests itself in a Republican revolution. A republic is a political methodology that doesn't champion the intrinsic nepotistic tendencies of monarchies, monarchicism, interesting that, but instead focuses on other pretenses, oftentimes meritocracy, but that's the facade. But other pretenses other than just family lines. So in initial stages, it can be further conducive towards the holding people accountable towards those pretenses, whether it's principles, whether it's efficacy, and results in additionally. But what happens in that process is that the very institution of family itself becomes devalued, and as the republic system becomes increasingly established and normalized, then people in society are valued for their contribution towards the republic rather than necessarily as members of a family. Now, it's not a categorical absolute experience, but those are the weights, and those are the balances, the imbalances that manifest, particularly as it becomes increasingly pervasive and normalized, because the nature of any type of methodology of leadership eventually becomes corrupt. That's just what history shows us. And so regardless of whether it's democracy, whether it's monarchy, or malarkey, or whatever else, it eventually becomes corrupt, and it corrodes, and the excesses become increasingly pronounced and systematized, because those in leadership increasingly entrench within that experience of the hierarchy, and those excesses are less attended to. So, and that's across the board, but regardless of what the thing is. Now, autocracy, which is what we support on this side, it has yet to be proven otherwise, but it's also intrinsically supposed to be latent and not necessarily hierarchical in terms of individuals, but it's just another ocracy that we can put into the laboratory of Earth. So, okay, so that's how Republic separates individual from family through the centuries. Increasingly, again, not absolutely, but increasingly, it normalizes that separation between individual and family. Then we have modern science. So modern science emerges and hugely grows just within the past 2 centuries, particularly through the advent of the Republic, through the institutions that are established through the Republic, governments, universities. Universities were not widespread 200 years ago, 300 years ago. The education that's provided, the classics in addition, literacy was very low. And so many of these things are facilitated, particularly through the advent of the Republic, through the migrations, through the technology, through the methodologies of rewarding technology and applying technology, militaristically, the advantages, but also agriculturally and industrially, factories and additionally. So science becomes increasingly huge. Universities study science and implement science and additionally. And so the thing about it, though, is that what we can observe is that science separates the individual from the body. Science separates individual from literally one's own body. And by that it's meant that, particularly within the past century, what happens when I talk about 99% of healing and health and well-being is psychosomatic. It comes from the mind. What science does is separates an individual from the body by the sense that people get accustomed to experiencing pleasure and sensation and equating that with well-being. The influence that's gained through the experience of pleasure, whether it's sex, whether it's intoxication, whether it's all the different types of things that are increasing indulgences, and additionally. People get enveloped in that experience, in the politics, in the economics, and the hierarchies of that. And ironically, that's actually separation from the body, but I'll be further specific and perhaps coherent in articulating that process of the separation between the individual and the body. People get enveloped in the experience of pleasure, lose a sense of what it means to, or what it is to be healthy, and because of losing a sense of what it means to be healthy, losing also that sense of what it takes to be healthy, what healthy living is, exercise, healthy eating, regular rest, these routines. Instead, people become accustomed and acclimated to an experience of pleasure or pain, and what can be done to experience the pleasure, and what can be done to avoid the pain. And what happens, particularly in the past half century, and additionally with the advent of computers and occupations that are increasingly sedentary, particularly professional occupations, and the social hierarchy, the higher part of the socio-economic hierarchy that is increasingly sedentary. Again, it becomes a weakening of the body, and rather than attending to that, it's a matter of just concentrating one's activities and additionally on experiencing the pleasure. And then when there are challenges, rather than knowing how to deal with it oneself, of which I mean, it's a matter of receiving advice from a professional, so that 1% of consultation becomes larger. It becomes 5%. It becomes 10%, because people become increasingly reliant upon not just the advice of the doctor, but then the prescriptions and the essential dependence on chemical remedies for what is traditionally done just by living healthy, by working in the field, by walking, by eating healthy, and additionally, because in this sedentary lifestyle of pleasure and eating what one wants to eat from all the different places of the earth that are just so fantastic and tasty, it's not healthy. And as one ages and gets these gray hairs, and additionally, it catches up with kinfolk. And instead of stopping and doing things that are increasingly healthy and letting go of some of these pleasures, it's a matter of just saying, oh, take a pill for this. Oh, there's all the fads of the diets and fasts and everything else like that. But the point is that people increasingly lose a sense of connection with one's own body. And what it actually is to be healthy, what it is to live healthy. And I ain't the perfect example, particularly, but I do learn, and I do improve, and I do decent. So that's the consideration of how science is further specific about that rationale. I guess one thing that might be beneficial to articulate is that science doesn't necessarily intend to do that. Science doesn't have some kind of heinous kind of agenda of separating individuals from individuals' bodies. But science does have a certain intrinsic competition and antagonism towards nature and natural solutions, because natural solutions tend to infringe upon the influence of science. So it's not science itself, but it's the people who are in science and who are just individuals and susceptible to the same tendencies of selfishness and greed, hatred, and delusion that everybody else is susceptible to. And so in terms of science becoming an archy as well, and recognizing that people are getting experience of health and well-being just by walking in naturally, and additionally, then people are less influenced by the hierarchy of science. And so science has an interest intrinsically, scientists have an interest intrinsically in people finding these solutions through scientific measures. And these scientific measures include chemistry and procedures, and additionally. And so when it becomes increasingly insidious, as it does, as history shows, from Central Africa, Congo, to the native sterilization and throughout the earth, science is not intrinsically evil or heinous or anything, but people utilize science for those purposes: selfish, greed, hatred, delusion. So recognizing that, and recognizing how hierarchies, just like any other archy, are increasingly self-serving. When it's observed that science has an intrinsic, somewhat antagonistic connection or relationship with nature, then those who have that awareness within the hierarchies of science and want to maintain and enlarge the influence of science, have an interest in people finding solutions and relying upon science for well-being. We're getting in circles now. So I'll say it again in another way. When people focus on pleasure and equate pleasure as health, people become increasingly dependent upon those sources of pleasure, whether it's the food, whether it's the drugs, all the different types of sensations. And that's where those who provide those things, corporations and additionally, that are significantly dependent on science as well, methodologies of agriculture and factory producing, and additionally, when people rely upon those experiences to gain that pleasure, then science is increasingly influential. And that is what much of the leadership within science is interested in intrinsically, is that dependency. So people focus on the experience of pleasure instead of what's healthy. And science has a motivation for people to do that, to experience the pleasure rather than necessarily do what's naturally healthy. And that is the general description of the separation between the individual and the individual's body, the natural health of the individual. And that can be evidenced, that is evidenced in much of the experience of the healthcare system, particularly as it pertains to elders. In addition, with love and peace to everybody, and health and well-being for everybody. But just how much, when people reach the elder stages of life, yes, people are living longer years, but people are increasingly dependent upon science in order to stay alive. And without practicing a natural habit and discipline that is conducive towards the health of the body. And so that is an example of science separating individual from the body, because the individuals are heavily relying upon science in order to maintain the health of the body, rather than the individuals doing things directly of one's own volition in order to experience that health and well-being within one's own body. And so that's the actuality. That's the actuality of the physicality, but it's also the actuality of the mentality, because I mentioned before, recognizing how much of health and well-being is psychosomatic, is the mind. When people are experiencing an ailment, and additionally, the first thing is to go to science. That means people are increasingly susceptible to the suggestions that science provides. So as I go into YouTube and additionally and see all these advertisements, and additionally, it's stress, it's anxiety, it's fear, it's greed, it's all these other things that are being projected into individual psyches to unsettle and imbalance people's psyches, to feel increasingly unwell, and to look for that remedy through what is being also suggested, and that's just part of the actuality. So I think that's about as best as it's going to be for the moment in terms of articulation. So again, in summation, modern science separates individuals from personal bodies, respectively. So when it comes to healing, if that might not necessarily be nitty-gritty, but it actually is, and perhaps the lack of any seeming lack of coherence or muddledness in that articulation is just perhaps actually an avoidance of the nitty-gritty and the actuality of the truth that is being communicated of that. So that's, what do I know? It is shared for the consideration of mindfulness and well-being, and the invitation for dutiful discussion for those who have similar or contrary or forming opinions. But we're going to go further into this joint. I have a few minutes to do so, and I should wrap up in about 10 minutes, to be honest, even before that, but still. All right, because we got some further nitty-gritty. All right, I'm just trying to see the sequence. These are the notes. Oh, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. All right, well, we'll just get into this, and then we'll try to wrap it up with something positive and uplifting and affirmation. So, DNA, haha. DNA apartheid and DNA warfare. So, and I may be perceived as being anti-science or whatever. I am pro everything, everybody, and I just recognize the World Republic as the ascended hierarchy in terms of political organizing, and additionally around the earth for the past couple of centuries. And I also recognize that modern science is ascended beyond the World Republic, and so these are the two prominent methodologies of organization and influence on earth, and so it's only natural that these are also the two prominent methodologies of committing pain and suffering. So I'm calling that out, and it's nothing personal against either one, but just recognizing that it's the actuality. religions are comparatively marginalized, to be honest, because religions are significantly dependent upon the rural republic and modern science. And so, in terms of people having animosity or antagonism towards religions, there's legitimacy historically, but at this point, religions don't hold the weight that religions used to do. So in terms of like addressing the ails that Earth is experiencing and the who's predominantly responsible, first of all, it's right here. Each of us. This is not an invitation for everybody to point to me. It's an invitation for everybody to point to each one's own self, respectively. That's where the primary responsibility is. And then when we study and further, we have to recognize what the systems and organizations or institutions are that are extended from our psychosomatic state, and to address it accordingly. So right now, Moral Republic is second on the list, and modern science is the top head honcho. So it's only natural that the head honcho is also going to be the most nasty bugger too, in terms of a temporal sense. So aside from myself, of course. So it's not antagonism or being anti-modern science or anything else. It's just a matter of recognizing that it's the culprit. It's not the culprit. It's a big culprit, and it's the culprit to collectively acknowledge. So that's that. Now, that being said, we're going on again into DNA. So DNA apartheid is the consideration, the actualization, the recognition, the observation of the evaluation and the devaluation of different genetic heritages of this earth. I guess what I just described briefly is the recognition of the distinction between DNA apartheid and DNA warfare. So DNA apartheid is basically just the distinction between the ethnic experiences from north to south. That's not accurate. I'm trying to be very genteel in describing race, black and white, African and European. So there it is. And just the devaluation of African DNA. And doing it in such a way that is comparatively less visible, and additionally, but also it's less necessary to I have to think of how to articulate this in a very brief period. Simple, formal, institutional, systemic separation according to DNA heritage, and that being done through a number of different methodologies, but it being done. And the thing about it is that it's like, from what is observed, it is a categorical experience around the earth. It's an earth-wide experience of an apartheid between the equatorial residents and the polar residents. But it's not the primary. It's not the primary source of conflict, because there's so much of an institutional momentum and additionally along the lines of that separation that it's already just a continuation of that. That's the DNA apartheid, and it's like a given. It's like a latent, subtle, tacit given, and it manifests itself at universities and corporations, and additionally in terms of organizing, socializing, and accordingly. That is the DNA apartheid part of it. Now we get into the DNA warfare, because the DNA warfare is the competition specifically amongst those who are invested in the DNA apartheid. So if there's just a recognition amidst the who we mess with and who we don't mess with kind of scenario in the DNA apartheid, then for those who we don't mess with, if we just deal with them as little as possible, and there's that. Avoid as much as possible, and just and there's an increasing squeezing that's being manifested, particularly within recent years through policies and additionally along those lines. So that's just getting rid of who we don't mess with. Then and this is in the DNA, those invested in the DNA scenario. So in that category of the who we mess with in this DNA scenario, it's like, okay, everyone's part of the group, but still everybody doesn't coalesce with each other too nicely. and that's particularly East and West. And to talk specifics, temporalities, and additionally, we are speaking of European civilization and Eastern Asian civilization. And this is where the DNA warfare manifests itself. And this might be perceived as hysteria, paranoia, psychosis, or whatever else. But that's part of the susceptibility of being honest within the geopolitics of today. So the way DNA warfare manifests itself, as with previous warfare, is specific and calculated aggressions that are targeted towards those who are perceived as increasing threats. So the nature of it, though, is very much evolved from the Cold War warfare methodology of all these buffers and pretenses for committing these aggressions. And we observe the manifestations of this as well. And again, there's most likely not going to be a mainstream news report about this, or at least at this moment, university courses that teach this, or many mainstream think tanks that articulate this, because these are all participants within the competition. And additionally, and the purpose of communicating this is not for the purpose of again, hysteria or excitement, or to pit any group against each other, because I love everybody and I promote the well-being of everybody as best as I can. It's a matter of being honest, observing, and articulating this in the interest of discussing this. And if for those who disagree, and additionally, beautiful, let's talk about it. But too much of the experience is that people don't discuss this because people are aware of it happening and want to avoid discussing it, because people have a vested interest in practicing and implementing it. And addressing it, discussing it, brings it to light, brings it to the attention of additional amount of people, wherein people can actively respond to it and perhaps undermine those intentionalities. And so instead, for those who do know and are vested in it, the interest is just avoiding it, or calling it crazy or whatever else. So anyways, it's an invitation for conversation. I'm going to avoid getting into many of the details because, like I say, we're working on time constraints at the moment. So we'll fast forward to the positive, affirming message. Solution: knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. Knowledge of self, knowing who we are existentially, who we are materially, who our ancestors are, where we come from, the legacy that we come from, the richness that we come from, the truth that we come from, the truth that we are, the truth of within our life, the purpose within our life, the truth in our gifts, in the purpose of our life being to improve the well-being of others, and that we each have skills and talents to manifest that well-being for others, to manifest that well-being within others. And when we have that knowledge of self, then we are strengthened and we are increasingly resilient amidst the temptations and the undue influences and suggestions and fears and stress and everything else like that. We have context, we have historical context of this existing for thousands of years, since time immemorial. We know the stories, we know the guidance, we know the lessons, we know the ethics, we know the discipline to get through these things, to guide these things, and recognize that these things have purpose. All these atrocities and challenges have purpose. It gives meaning and it's part of the nature of life, is continually reconciling with the dukkha, with the suffering in this life. And so that's the knowledge of self, having that knowledge and being equipped to do that. And then the discipline of self is how we practice that knowledge of self to heal our own selves. Again, what we eat, our exercise, prayers and meditation, communication, healthy relationship, and additionally, talking to oracles in a healthy way and further. So discipline of self is how we practice our knowledge of self on a regular basis. And then love of self is sharing that well-being that we experience from our knowledge of self and our discipline of self with others, our relationships with others. That's the love of self. So that's the solution. That's the solution individually. And then again, we go back to the notion of community and relationship with each other. It's a matter of finding the optimal ways of sharing our knowledge of self, our discipline of self, and our love of self collectively with each other. And so that goes back to the experience of the aligning our core, is finding tangibly, specifically, today and continually, the regular ways in which we share our practices of strengthening and nurturing ourselves respectively and collectively. So that sounds like what I was saying before. So is that the positive message? Is that the uplifting affirmation initially? Yes. Guess what? It's not a high. It's not a euphoria in some kind of like quick fix type experience. It's actually just that experience of well-being and constancy amidst all the afflictions and the nasty nitty gritty, and still being able to smile and be comfortable and balanced. So surprise, there's no surprise. It's just the same old thing amidst all the nasty things that we learned and experienced along the way. So that's life. So congratulations. I think we're just gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna get off the note. So namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mir, pranam, jai janendra, satnam, zaijian, adios, chetaklis, sayonara, metta samadhi, salangwa, pyungwa, eshwasol, agapeke irini, asempena asamuji, kelagufred, one love and peace, happiness, liberation. God bless. Rastafari.